I want to talk about commodification, and we'll see if that ends up being what I talk about, because I don't know what the definition is and I can't check it right now. But I'm pretty sure I want to talk about commodification. If commodification is the process by which a good or a service, a commodity, that much I know, is transformed by market forces, the laws of supplies and demand, as well as the profit motive of the capitalist system, to make as much money as possible from that good or service, and how that interacts with the kind of original intent of that item and how it changes what that might be. So markets can be a good thing in that they can help set prices of goods and services at points which are efficient, and so there's not an overproduction or an underproduction of a certain good because it's been arbitrarily had a price set by some bureaucracy that doesn't know the first thing about the real economy, because maybe it's set by some authoritarian autocrat tyrant sitting in a castle who doesn't know the first thing about potato prices, because all he eats is pieces of pie and plump portions of pumpkin pudding. Okay. And so he sets a price too high, and so now there's an overproduction of potatoes because the farmer's like, oh yeah, the government's paying, you know, all this money for potatoes. Great, there's a ton of potatoes, and the government just spent way more money than they probably should have, and there's too many potatoes, and some of them are rotting now, so that's not efficient. They set the price too low, and then the farmers are either forced to produce enough potatoes through brutality, which that sucks, and then they go out of business because they're producing things that cost more than they're not making a livelihood, or there's just not enough potatoes that are produced, or not, and then that translates to not enough food in general, and so other people starved other ways. And so either way, it kind of sucks. So if the supply and demand can't help set a price at a reasonable rate for things like potatoes, and they are helpful in that instance. In other ways, it's not so good. So like, let's say that I was a musician and I came out here to be inspired, and I've just been sitting on this rock for, you know, weeks at a time, listening to the sound of the stream and the wind and the birds and the trees, and eventually I come up with a song, and then I do that 10 more times, and I come up with an album, and I share that to my local village people. And one of them's a businessman, and he's like, I need to share this with the world. Like, you know, and then he shows to another businessman at the record label. They're like, oh, this is great. Like, we need to share this with the world, and, you know, you can help the world, and we can help you help the world by distributing this. We just need to make sure that as many people hear it as possible. And so what could go wrong? The problem is that their interests of selling as many copies of my newly commodified art as possible are not in alignment with my interests as an artist of having my art be true to what the artist's intention was originally. And so they might say things like, hey, you know, we love your music, but this one's 9 minutes long, this song is 14 minutes long, that one's 12 minutes long. We're never going to fit them on the radio if they're like that, so why don't we recut those so they're 4 minutes long each? I think that would be better. Also, this song and that song, you're talking about too much hippie stuff. I don't think people are going to relate to, you know, rabbits and streams and talk about that, and you kind of get a little socialisty here and there. Everybody needs to love each other. We think it's kind of weird, and we don't think that the targeted demographic is going to like it as much, and so our research shows that people love and respond well to, and so do advertisers, talking about clubbing. Let's go to the clubs, let's talk about buying expensive items, let's switch the beat up so that it's like dunce, because our research says that people are more likely to stay tuned in if you know, the music's like this. Pretty soon the artist sounds just like every other artist on the radio, and the art has been eliminated. And so people understand this, but that's capitalism doing that. There are plenty of good artists out there, they're just not pushed forward because they're not as easy to commodify when they're true to themselves. And the same with a lot of the rest of the economy, which has been commodified. Like, is it a good thing that pharmaceutical companies are pushing more pills on people than have ever been occurred in the history of, it's got to be more, like, we're the most heavily medicated society in the world, I think, and people are taking tons of pills, and they're still super depressed, and so it's not working that much on the aggregate. We're still not very healthy, and that's in part because as people are pushed pills, they're also pushed Big Macs and sodas and cigarettes and television and everything else, and so it's like, oh, we're gonna fix the problem by rebranding medicine in a format that is what caused much of the problem in the first place. If instead people had their basic needs met in terms of food and water and shelter and the basic necessities that you need to live a regular life, medical care when it's necessary, not when it's on television telling you to buy the pills all the time, and then they found their meaning and their happiness through interactions with regular people, which everybody knows deep down, like this is where happiness actually comes from. But the television says it's going to come from purchasing more sugary cereal, and then and then the next commercial is going to say, oops, looks like you have high diabetes. You should take these pills in order to, so we can help fix you. Does anybody think that that's really what the problem is that you just haven't been taking these pills and you haven't got the cereal? Nobody really thinks that, but we all understand that that's through the system, and that's through commodification, obscuring good things, food, healthcare, arts, music, which is art, but you get my drift, in order to make more money. Not always great. Even with food and razor blades, which I was talking about how great it is, commodification with potatoes, if it goes too far, it's not great, because pretty soon there's giant agro businesses that want to sell as much corn as possible, and so then lobby the government to get huge subsidies for it so that there's an overproduction, and then they put that in high fructose corn syrup and put that in everybody's cereal and everything else so that everybody gets fatter and they sell more corn products, and then they push trade deals which allow us to export all of our extra agricultural products to developing countries like Mexico, so that their poor farmers go out of business because they can't compete with highly subsidized U.S. agribusiness pushing unhealthy things down their throat. That's another part of commodification, and we have the most obese country in the world, I think, still, but the rest of the world is catching up because the rest of the world is globalizing and commodifying, and they're getting fatter too from among other things. But no, actually, I don't know how many. Yeah, there's definitely other things, but one of the main ones is commodification. And if you're not careful, it goes everywhere in terms of capitalism needs to grow. If there's no growth, there is no investment, because you don't invest in things that you don't think are going to have a return on that investment in the long term. And so you need constant growth. But if you're selling something like razor blades, which if there's a relatively constant amount of men shaving a relatively constant amount of time, then why would people need more razor blades? Well, they're like, okay, double blades, shave quicker. Triple blades, 4 blades, Roger Federer shaving his face. You want to look like Roger, don't you? Don't you want to win 20 major titles? Like, you need to shave like Roger. Back in the, I don't know when it was, probably the 50s, because that's when a lot of bad things happened. They were like, how do we double our market for getting people to shave? Let's get women to shave their entire bodies in terms of their legs and their arms and the rest of their bodies, presumably. I don't know. They did that because they're like, we need to expand our marketplace. So there was a propaganda campaign. So now it's like weird if women have body hair. And like people, I mean, I've grown up that way too. It's like if I see a super, super hairy woman, it's like not as normal as it would have been for if it was in the 1920s and someone saw a woman like that, because that's what they looked like back then, because there was no propaganda. So the entire society thinks that this is what needs to happen. And then now people that don't do it are looked at differently, and it's worked. So now there's razor blades for women too, and they've doubled their market.